positioning, I quite agree with you, because I found it such a breath of fresh air, Nigel Farage. I mean, it just emphasised how we've had this cosy political consensus.
Yeah.
All of them said the same thing on all the big issues, whether it was immigration, the NHS, taxation, it was all the same thing. And Nigel had a different viewpoint. And in my opinion, having done sort of various think tank reports and research into things like the NHS and immigration, a much more truthful, well-informed insights than any of the others who simply were living in, my opinion, a mythical fantasy land.
And seem very much on side with the audience as well, but we will come on to that in a minute. Let's have a look at Nigel Farage talking at the debate this evening. Here he is.
Just that their leaders are dull, very dull in the case of Labour. The real leader of the Labour Party is here tonight on the stage. At least she's got some personality. We've got Rishi Slippery Sunak. He's fed all the lines to Penny Mordaunt. Don't believe any of it.
Nigel number 2, after Nigel number 1. Let me come to you. The only time that Nigel got a bit of a laugh out of the room tonight was when he took a swipe at Blair without the flair, talking about Sir Keir Starmer. How do you think he did? On a personal level, on a presentational level?
On a presentational level, as always, Nigel was brilliant. When you get down to it, I mean, I'd like to have heard a bit more about his NHS policy, which was the first I'd heard that, where he's talking about we must basically dismantle the NHS as it stands and have something different. He pointed towards France, but didn't give us any detail on that. We know about the immigration policy. He didn't seem to go into it in any more detail than we know. I don't think that's going to work anyway. I mean, but presentationally, Nigel always does have a presence. He's very good at these kind of things. I think he's let down by having so many people to try and debate with.
Because, as Harriet was saying, there's this sort of consensus of opinion of a very left. It made me think, sitting there, that we've had, 5 political parties that could easily be described as left-wing, with the Conservatives somewhere in the middle and Nigel on the end. Do you know what I mean, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've always talked about the Conservative Party and where it needs to go to next is not lurch. Someone says, "Oh, you're going to lurch somewhere." So lurch is not a good word in politics. You don't lurch anywhere. It's how you respond to things. And you've got to start in the centre ground, not wishy-washy centre ground, but you've got to start where the majority of people are. If you're standing on one end of it, shouting at that audience, just not reacting to you, then you're not going to get anywhere. You start there and you take them on that journey with you.
Who do you think there tonight would be described as sitting in that centre ground?
Well, I mean, I think Penny did a pretty good job.
Well, Penny and Angela definitely were in the centre ground.
Because, you can't come out of the back of spending 408 billion quid on COVID and then thinking, when you want your money back, effectively, and pay down.
But then own it. But then own it.
Do a good job. I mean, on what? I mean, on the NHS, she just said, let's spend more money like everybody else, which doesn't work. I mean, I think Nigel's absolutely right. There's plenty of countries, France being the one he picked, but there's plenty of others who have a free healthcare. And which works much better, where people are much better heart and everything else, and where people are actually alive, where they're dead in the UK. So it's just spending more money, which mostly go, as I saw when I was writing about the NHS, mostly seems to go on NHS managers with no good being done to the patients.
And I think there's a certain culture and management approach that you can take, rather than having to, I think as Nigel seemed to be implying, that you dismantle the entire thing. I don't think you necessarily need to dismantle it, but there is a massive inefficiency about the way that the NHS is run with the money. Because if you just shove loads of money at it, I remember at various spending rounds, people, ministers in the Treasury saying, I keep getting requests for more money, but I don't know what is going on.
But this has been the problem with the NHS ever since its formation in 1948. That all we've done is, because it becomes almost a religion in this country, we tinker at the edges, we don't do any proper reforms, and that applies to all governments.
And Stephen Flynn was trying to pull that back, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
I heard him in the background mention that.
Yes.
Yeah, that sanctity.
But, I mean, for instance, the stabbing is another thing. I've just recently done quite a big series on stabbing and looked at all the stats. And again, Nigel was right. And everybody else completely missed it, it's because stop and search does work. Because actually, Nigel didn't mention this, but all right, so much higher proportion of the black community gets stopped and searched. But the key fact is that a much higher proportion of the black community get stabbed. So you're not going to do one without the other. And it's one of these tough political decisions which all the other politicians just seem to duck.
Yes, and look,